if I died today, that would probably be one of the most amazing, breathtaking moments I've had in my life. And I've done a lot of things, but it was just to see people say, you know what? My kid died 10 years ago and I have never talked about it. Or I got a drug problem. And it was just that kind of unfolding. Like people had been waiting for an opportunity to be heard.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Look, we've all got pain. We've all got stories we're afraid to tell. But what if there was a space where you could actually share those stories without judgment, without fear, and find healing in the process? Today, I'm sitting down with Liz Walker, a former news anchor turned pastor who discovered something powerful. When we create safe spaces for people to be truly heard, something miraculous happens. In the heart of the Roxbury neighborhood in Boston, she started a movement called Can We Talk that's transforming how communities process trauma, grief, and healing. This isn't just another feel-good story. This is about real people. Mothers who've lost children, young men caught in the cycles of violence, entire communities learning to heal together. Liz's journey will challenge how you think about pain, community, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Here's the hope. Healing is possible, and it starts with being brave enough to tell your story. So join us, so no one is left alone. Here is my conversation with Liz Walker. Liz Walker, welcome to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Well, I want you to look back on your life, and the tapestry that you have woven with your life has kind of coalesced in community healing, these groups that you have, the Can We Talk groups. How did you get there? What was the trajectory of your life that got you to a place of, we need to do something different for our communities to help us heal?
You know, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's a question I've been asking myself for the last 30, 40 years. How did I get here? I was raised a family. My father was a minister. So I think there's always been that community kind of outreach. My father died when I was 12. But I think that's kind of in my spiritual DNA. My stepmom was very much in the community in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's where I grew up. And so my role models were people who kind of depended on and led the community in that time. When my parents died, my father died when I was 12. My mother died when I was born. It was the community who kind of stepped in. And I never thought about that, Josh, until recently. But it was the church community. It was the folks next door. It was, we always say, oh, back in the day when everybody knew everybody, but that's true. In Little Rock, in our neighborhood, people knew each other and took care of each other. So I was kind of raised by a group, a community. And my father remarried, my stepmother, but so I think that was embedded in me always. And then as a journalist, I was probably more focused on those kinds of stories, and certainly going into ministry. So it's kind of like you're led, I won't preach a sermon, but it is the feeling that your life has been led in a direction and you follow it.
Well, you can preach a sermon on it, and I think it'll preach, because I think that's what happens is you lead, you grow, you get into a place where you're discovering really your core identity, who God has created you to be, and what your contribution to the world can be. And that's actually the journey of a lifetime to be able to do that. How did you move? So you started out your professional career as a journalist, you were a news anchor in Boston. How did the shift into ministry and to becoming a pastor happen? And why do you think that you shifted and went that route?
I think I shifted again because of this kind of directional thing, but I loved journalism. That was absolutely the most exciting part to that point of my life. And in 2001, I went. Now, I don't think God calls us in just, I can give you a specific time, but I can tell you the drama of my life. Now, I think God was always calling me, but in 2001, I went with a group of ministers and humanitarians actually from Boston to South Sudan. And I wanted to do a documentary on their trip. At the time, the issue was slavery, and they wanted to investigate for themselves what we had heard about the slavery that was a part of that civil war. And we went, and I had never been in a war zone. I had never seen people who had been mistreated and marginalized and living like that. And unfortunately, that's still the situation in Sudan. And my ministers who went with me, two ministers out of Boston, interpreted what was going on with me as a call. I didn't interpret it that way. It was just that I had never seen anything like this. And of course, you're shook and it throws you. I then came back listening to them and really inspired by them, thinking I had to be able to do something more than just take pictures of bad situations. Because they wanted to change the situation in South Sudan. Who thinks they can do that, right? Who does that? So impressed with their lives and with their actions that I went into a seminary at Harvard, and took four more years to figure it out, but felt compelled that this was something that will allow me to do more in the world than tell the story. And so I think that was part of my changeover. We went at a time when nobody was going to South Sudan because 2001 was the time when Osama bin Laden had, started his mission and was building the Al Qaeda in Sudan. I didn't know this until retrospect, but at the time, it just seemed like an incredible adventure. We ended up going back and forth from Boston to South Sudan for 10 years, and we built a girls' school there. And I think that was a part of just seeing there was so much more to the world than the view that I had to that point. Finished school, worked on the ministerial staff of the church of these two people who inspired me, Ray and Gloria White Hammond in Boston. They're incredible people. And this new direction, I don't know if it was a new direction, but this new way of traveling in this direction, I think was set off then.
So I think for anybody, I want to, before we dive into then Roxbury and your pastorship there and what you've seen in that community, I don't know, how do people then see a journalistic viewpoint of telling the story about marginalized people and communities that are suffering, crime that's happening in community into a place of knowing about something to actually being involved in the creation of something better in community?
I don't know if that happens to everybody, but it certainly happened to me. When you feel that you can do something more, not you may not have the power to change the situation, but what you're doing is inadequate. Now, I believe in journalism, at least the journalism that I knew back in the day, when we only had 3 networks and you had to change the channel, right, with your own hands back in the day. But I think that something happens on the inside of us and we just feel more engaged. We always said that as reporters, we were objective and our job was to remain removed. How realistic is that really? I mean, we're human. So can you be objective? So when you are kind of changed on the inside and you want to do more, you realize that you're not objective, that everything is subjective, and you take a stand and you say, this is what I want to do. Let me give you an example. Remember, well, you may be too young, but when Katrina hit the New Orleans area and you watched television, you watched all these reporters in helicopters and you saw people on rooftops with white flags and people were begging for help. And the reporters mainly just reported. And I remember seeing 2 or 3 reporters, national reporters, who crossed the line and who went into the waters and to help some people out. Anderson Cooper, I'll never forget that moment that I saw him on national TV doing that kind of thing. Now, Anderson Cooper is still a reporter, but something touched him deeply that he felt he had a greater responsibility. So I think it's that kind of thing that happened to me. I can't speak for everyone, but I think you just felt like you wanted to be a part of something as opposed to taking this contrived remove stance for me.
Hey friends, it's Joshua here, and I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about Shifting Culture Productions. If you've got a podcast, you're thinking about starting one, or you're dreaming up another creative venture, we're here to help bring your vision to life. From production and coaching to strategy and supports, we'll work alongside you to get your project off the ground and thriving. Let's partner together to create something impactful. To schedule a call and learn more about pricing, just email me at jjohnson@allnations.us. I'd love to hear about your ideas and see how we can make them happen. Let's create something amazing together. Reach out today. So take me into the beginning of when you started in Roxbury as a pastor at your church. What was happening in that moment, and what was the community? What was the community like, and what was the pain that the community was processing when you first started?
Josh, it fits just into your last point or your last question about that changeover. I had covered stories in Roxbury from the time I got to Boston. And Roxbury is an urban community. It's now kind of in transition, but it was a community of poor people, community where there are lots of challenges, wonderful people there, but there are still many challenges there. So I had always thought I knew Roxbury because I covered it as a reporter. But when I became a minister and was asked to come to this church and take over, again, you see it from a different perspective. And what I found was people who were in pain. I mean, my church is on a very busy street in the middle of Roxbury on Warren Street. So a lot of the issues out in the world, the issues of challenge, walk right past the church. So drug abuse past the church. So bad that we had to learn how to get those, I can't think of the name of them now, but those things that help people who've had an overdose. We actually taught our deacons and our ushers how to do that just in case. So the point is that when I became a pastor of this church and started having closer relationships with people, I'd have to park my car. The first time I parked my car to go into the church, my car was vandalized. Then my car was broken into. So, the first thing you do is panic, let me out of here. I don't want to be here. But once you get deeper into the neighborhood, you get to know people and you understand a little more what's going on. So in doing that, what I think I began to realize was the rage and the numbness that you saw and the people who maybe were having alcohol issues and the people, there's something beneath that. And I would suggest to you that it's pain, that people are living with a lot of pain. So it was realizing that on the streets. Now, on top of that, Josh, there had been all of these gang wars on the streets around my church. And young men were being killed weekly. This was a really rough time in Boston. This is back, I started in 2011. The year before, I think there had been 75 young Black men killed in the neighborhood in that year. Now, that may not be Chicago numbers, but for a town like Boston, those were huge numbers. And so you see all of that. And one of the members of my church was killed. It was a young man who was killed the year before I got there. So you're hit with all of this violence, all of this rage around the church, and you want to do something. The marathon, I'm telling you a lot. So I'm covering a lot of areas, but it's all kind of fitting together. In 2013, I was asked to officiate at the marathon bombing prayer service. Governor Deval Patrick had a big prayer service after the marathon bombing. They hadn't found the bombers yet. The whole city was in an uproar that it had been obviously attacked like this, was traumatized. And I was asked to do to officiate this huge service in a Catholic church with thousands of people there and millions more watching. And after leaving that service, which was a very moving service, the president was there, the governor was there, all these people were speaking of Boston Strong and how we'd overcome. It dawned on me, Josh, that from that service to back to my little church in Roxbury, I saw some of the same things. People were, kind of like they'd been terrorized, but there was no response like this prayer service. So I think it was a little bit of all of that that helped me think about what can we do that's more than the funeral, that's more than the marches. What can we do to help people's emotional and psychological damage that's done by things like this? The Boston Marathon bombing event was a one time horrible event. In this neighborhood, there are horrible events all the time. What can we do to support people? And I think that's how this all began to unfold and how we came. I didn't do it by myself. There were many people I talked to, many people who helped us, and trying to support families, including the family of the young man who'd been killed in our own church a few years ago. Because trauma and grief, there's no expiration date. Even though this young man had been killed a few years earlier, his people were still very much traumatized, still very much grieving. So all of this kind of came into an idea that we should allow people an opportunity to grieve in community.
I think that's such a key piece, is grieving in community, so that people could tell their story to heal from the inside out. And a lot of times when you see systemic issues that are happening in Roxbury, right outside your church, on the streets of, you have murder, you have drugs, gang violence, there's a lot of things that are happening in that community that is tearing the community apart. We like to try to heal or fix from the outside in. What are some of the things that you have seen people with good intentions trying to find fixes for communities that come from the outside, even if you're an insider, like living there, but they come from the outside in, that don't always make the biggest difference that we want to, even if we're well-intentioned?
I think part of that, and I love the way you phrase that question, because it could be people who live in the community trying to do the same thing. But I think part of the problem is the idea that we can fix people. When we went to Sudan, and this was years ago, we were kind of led by this spirit that we can build a school and we can change the. And you know what? The place where we built the school is still in conflict. They're still fighting. So what did we really do? So the point is not to fix problems, but to build real relationships with people. I think that's the difference. I think when you go in with that good old American know-how and we can end this and we can stop this and we can change this, I think there's naivete that you really do need to kind of reflect on. And that's what I've been doing in working with this program and in learning about what trauma really is. I can't fix you, Josh, and you can't fix me, but I can stand with you. I can be with you, and I can tell you that I'm going to hang in there with you. I think sometimes that's the best we can do, but that's not a little thing. That's kind of a big thing in a way, you know?
It's a really big thing.
Yeah, because we all have stuff. I got stuff too. And by admitting that and then standing together, I think we can become stronger. I don't want it to sound like it's so simple, because it's not just that easy thing, but it is admitting that I can't fix you.
So then what was the shift in your community of saying, hey, maybe I was trying to fix something, into a place of let's connect, share our stories, and share grief, suffering together, and walk with each other through this?
I think the thing that changed everything for me was meeting the family of this young man who was killed. His name was Corey Johnson, and his whole family went to my church. They sat. I'll never forget. They sat on the right side, and if they all showed up, 4 generations from Trinidad Tobago, if they all showed up, it would fill the whole side of the church. But in kind of getting to know his mom and his sister and his brother and other members of his family and listening to them. And that's what I did. At the time, it wasn't so intentional that about healing. It was just, the former pastor there said, if you really want to be a good, effective pastor here, you need to listen to people. And so I started listening to them, and I listened to the mom talk about the idea that she was numb from the time that she got the first call until then. That hadn't changed. And she believed in God. So it was this kind of interesting thing, because sometimes you think if you have faith, or if you're a Christian, or if you're a Buddhist, or whoever you are, as I try to make this broad, that you can kind of miss the struggle, or you can heal quickly. And that's not necessarily true. What it really, to me, my interpretation is, you don't have to do it alone. So in listening to this family and getting to know them, the young man's sister, who's a wonderful young woman, these are very quiet, beautiful people, told me that she hadn't slept in years, had not had a good night's sleep. So then you have to go study, well, what the heck is happening, and how do you try to work with that? Well, the first thing you do, don't try to fix it. Learn what it is, name the pain, figure it out, work with her. And so that's slowly developed. We talked to mental health experts, we talked to other, religious experts. So we just kind of pulled a lot of things together to figure out how could we best support people going through what this family was going through. Now, their tragedy had happened by the time I got to the church in 2011. Their tragedy was a year old. By the time we got to the marathon bombing, their tragedy was several years old, but they were still going through. We then realized, Josh, that there were people in our community whose tragedy had happened 20 years ago, and they hadn't dealt with it. So it was all of that combined to figure out a way about grieving. Because the first thing we try to do in our culture is get over it. Move on. That's not very fair, and that's not very real. So that's slowing down, listening, I think, is what kind of changed my focus in think about grief. And you know what else, Josh? There's so many people grieving. People are grieving everywhere. We hide it, we mask it, but so it's realizing all of that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really appreciated. I lived in the Middle East for 5 years, worked with Syrian refugees, war refugees. And when they were grieving, women who lost their husbands, they would wear black for, a good almost 2 years, a year and a half. During funerals, like there's wailing, there is literal like bodily wailing of things that trying to actually get out the grief, and then women together wailing together. And it wasn't just one woman doing this, but it was a collective grief that the whole family and extended family and the tribe all came together to do this and have these grief rituals, which we don't really have in America. And we've lost some of this way of grieving. So what you have done and set up is really, I think, essential and important for us to have these spaces to tell our stories, to suffer with people, to walk with people in the midst of their pain and their grief. How did you move into Corey's family and saying, hey, maybe we need to figure out this is a good thing for us to help them, into a place of going and setting up a community space of saying, I'm going to open up my church basement. We're going to have some chairs in a circle and we're going to tell our story.
Well, Corey's family, and you've seen this, so I'm glad I'm talking to someone who understands that what we're doing is not new. This is not rocket science. It's been done for generations and generations, but we lost it in our culture. Corey's family, after I, got to know them better and we talked a lot more, the fact that they would talk about it just moved me and still moves me, almost takes my breath away. And now Deborah will say that it helped her, and she had not been offered that opportunity before. But they had done some grief counseling. They had gone to grief counselors. As a matter of fact, the former pastor brought mental health counselors into the church. That's unheard of in Black churches. So I guess these things were already kind of their seeds were planted. And I went back to the grief counselors who originally had worked with Corey's family. Now, the thing about their working with Corey's family was they were on a limited time. So they will work for 6 weeks. And in talking to the grief counselors, we came up with the idea, along with Corey's family, that we would open up the doors and see who would come. And we would, as part of our faith mission, we'd just keep the doors open. We try to do it once a month. We try to, do what we were going to do. But the point was we would be there for people, anybody. Didn't matter whether you Christian, we didn't care. Anybody in the neighborhood could come. Looking back on it, it was really risky. But I think it was the courage of Corey's family, his mom, to say, yeah, that sounds like something. And it was really hard for them. She didn't want to talk at all. The first night we did this, she came to me, she said, because we had planned it, that the Corey's family would tell their story. So that would give people an idea, because this is a peer-to-peer program. This was not about me getting up and saying, you should talk. This was about people who had been through pain saying, I'm going to be vulnerable, and I hope that you will do that too. And right before we were going to open up and start this event, this gathering, after we had dinner, Deborah said, I don't think I can do it. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, if you don't do it. But it was a lot for her to open. That takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable about your worst day of your life. I'll just share that with you. People don't just open up to that kind of stuff. So it was the courage of this family, I think, that inspired us that this was something. We put a sign on the church. No, we had talked about it this wasn't something instantaneous. It took us maybe a year to come up with the form, the model that we ended up, and we've been working on it ever since. But we put a sign on the side of the church. We're on a very busy street, and it said, if you are going through anything, if you are grieving, if you've been traumatized, if you have had a loss, come have dinner with us. Can we talk? And the first night that we did it, we had almost, I'm going to say somewhere between 75 and 100 people who just showed up from the neighborhood, which was amazing considering our neighborhood. Now, let me give you a little backdrop on our neighborhood. It was a very silent neighborhood. When you have a shooting, sadly, in lots of urban neighborhoods, the police say, well, we can't get witnesses. And the witnesses say, well, we don't trust the police. So, and all of that is true. So what you have is these neighborhoods where nobody talks about anything. They just keep it to themselves. So to have these people step out was just, I don't know, I call it an act of God, because it wasn't anything I had thought through. And listening to Deborah, she found the strength to just tell a little bit. She didn't tell a lot. Other people got up. And if I died today, that would probably be one of the most amazing, breathtaking moments I've had in my life. And I've done a lot of things, but it was just to see people say, you know what? My kid died 10 years ago and I have never talked about it, or I got a drug problem. And it was just that kind of unfolding. Like people had been waiting for an opportunity to be heard. So that's how it all started. We called it Can We Talk, which was very simple. And I was basing that on, you're too young, but Joan Rivers. Do you remember Joan Rivers? She used to do a whole act around Can We Talk? And it was based on that. And it just kind of took off in the neighborhood.
Then what did you see as people started to come around these groups and openly share and be vulnerable, and you're creating a space where this can happen, and I'm sure there's some parameters around it, so that would be helpful to talk about some of these parameters. But when people started to share their story, what did you see happen within the community when stories were shared back and forth that people didn't talk about before?
Well, one of the first things that the perimeters that we set up, the guidelines we call them, was that whatever happens in here stays in here. So this is anonymous. And there's no, you don't have to sign a form, and we're not putting police at the door. This is just an issue of trust. We're asking you not to share. And I promise you that I've never heard of anything being betrayed in that sense. So the thing I noticed in the neighborhood around the church, more people heard about it. So we started with once a month. That's all we thought we could do. We didn't have any money, so we were volunteering the food and all of that we were bringing that from home. But I think what I began to see is the reputation of the program got ahead of us. We weren't, we didn't know, we had no master plan. We were thinking this will help this neighborhood. So the change that I began to see is that people kept coming and people heard about it through other people. And so what we started as a kind of a conversation about violence, because it really did start on the idea that the neighborhood was out of control in violence. Let's talk about it. It kind of expanded and people began to show up who had other issues. And we accepted that. We didn't say, oh, you can only come in if you know someone who's been murdered. We just said, if you got stuff that hurts you, that helped us change our definition of trauma. Trauma is not some set standard affliction. Trauma is what trauma is to you. You define it. If this keeps you up at night, if this gives you nightmares, if this, makes you have all kinds of other conditions. So those were the subtle things that I began to notice as the more people who came in. Now, did the neighborhood suddenly change and there was no more violence? No, I wish I could tell you that. That did not happen. But I'll tell you one thing that did happen. What we really wanted what one of my deep wishes was, or deep prayers that I didn't share with anybody, was that some young people would start coming in. Most of the people who came to our events or our gatherings were mothers who had lost their children, a few fathers, brothers and sisters, but the young men, I would say, are targeted young men who are at risk, the young men who are out there with the violence. Corey's age, I was hoping they would come in. One night, a young man came in that actually, now we have a few more men because we have a program for young men, but at the time, he was the only young man, most of the older people in the room. And he sat in the back and people got up and shared and sat down, got up and shared. And finally he got up and he said, I've done a lot of things in my life that I really wish I hadn't done. I just needed to say that to somebody. And maybe he said a couple of other things. He never gave his name. And he was he had that look about him, I hate to do that because that's kind of like, stereotyping, but he did have the look of the street. And he had a tough look, a no nonsense look, but he got up and shared just that little bit. And I thought that might have been the most difficult thing he's ever done in his life. That might have been the most emotional thing he's ever done in his life. And then he left. But it gave me hope that maybe we could somehow one day reach more young men. We've since started a program just for young men to talk among themselves. And we've started a program for kids to talk among themselves. But those were the changes that you began to see in the neighborhood. Mainly people told us they liked the program because more people showed up. That's all the marketing we've ever done. Now we're trying to change it a little bit, but back in those days, that was it.
Hey everyone, it's Joshua here. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being part of the Shifting Culture community. If you're enjoying the conversations we're having, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but also keeps us inspired to bring you these impactful conversations. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, head on over to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, where you'll find extra insights, reflections, and more ways to engage with the topics that we explore here. Finally, if you believe in what we're doing and want to support the show, you can make a donation through the Support the Show link in the episode notes. Every contribution helps keep these important conversations alive. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of this journey to embody Jesus and impact the culture around us. How did this change you? How did help excavate your own trauma
Oh my
in your
God.
life.
Oh my God, that's the whole point. This is the whole thing. Who knew? It's just like going to sit there and think, I'm going to change your life. No, no, it doesn't work that way. Now, this will preach. So you sit there and you hear these stories. Now, I'm a TV news producer in my mind because I've been in television longer. So at first I'm thinking, okay, we got to get exactly these 12 people to get up. What are we going to do if nobody gets up? How are we going to? But eventually I just calmed my little self down and started really listening to what people had to say. And I tell you, if you listen enough with your heart, not just with your head, it touches you to the point you start thinking about your own stuff. And I didn't know I was trauma. I would never have, if you had asked me, I would have told you I was A type personality. I would have told you lots of different answers for who I am. But through this program, it took years. It wasn't something immediately that happened. But over the years, I began to realize my own issues. And my brother, who lives in another, he's passed now, but at the time he lived in another state. I called him and we started talking about growing up and both realized that we were children of trauma, and we just never called it that. We were children of racial trauma. We were children of intergenerational trauma, and so I think what happens when you go to these with your heart open, you begin to realize again your own wounds and your own pain. So this program has been more just sitting there listening to others has been more healing for me than anything, and that's the truth, and I'm still working, I now see a counselor, but, I never knew that, I knew I had some issues, I knew I hit a little bit too much alcohol, but everybody I knew hit too much alcohol. I knew I had some things, but to start connecting the dots of your own wounds is what you wanna do. And so I think it has been very healing for me, which I talk about in the book that I've written on it. That's the part, that's the key that you begin to see yourself a little bit more clearly.
And when we can start to see that, hey, we have these issues, everybody else has these issues, that connects us together, that we're all human and we all are going through pain and trauma and our traumas in our life. So what was the Black church tradition that helped inform some of this? I know, so if you look at the the history of the Black church in America, there there are people of pain and trauma and suffering. What was helpful within the Black church tradition that you brought into some of this that helped people in the midst of ongoing trauma that wasn't a post-traumatic event? It was just an ongoing traumatic life. What was helpful in that tradition that helped people just be with each other in the midst of pain and suffering?
I think you see things that you don't even understand are helpful until you get some perspective on them. So I grew up in the Black church, as I've told you. My father's church, and my father was kind of preacher that he wanted his two children to go to. We went to church all day long on Sunday. When our church was out at noon, then he'd send us to somebody else's church. If just going to church could get you to heaven, I'm in. Okay, but it don't work that way. But what I did get, and maybe this is heaven, I got to see how Black worship can be there's such a variety of Black worship, but one of the caretakers, my main caregiver who took care of me from the time my birth mother died, Mother Riley. Mother Riley's church was Baptist, but it was her whole belief was that, she had a very personal relationship with God. She ironed clothes. That was her main job, and then she kept children. And I just remember going to church with her, and she was very physical in her worship. So she would get happy, is the word we called it. And you see it in movies now, with Black movies. You'll see the dance that we all do at weddings, and then you'll see the church scene where we're all get. But that's real. And in studying more about Black worship, I realized that the contemplative practices of Black worship come straight out of Africa. The practices of dance, the practices of moaning aloud, the practices that you talked about, that you saw, when you were in where you said Syria, Libya? Where were you?
Well, I was living in Jordan, but working with Syrians. Huh.
Syrians.
Yeah.
All of that comes out of ancient practices of how we mourn and grieve and how closely connected grieving and joy are. So I saw in my own experience as a child that this physicality of worship was a way to relieve the stress of life. That was very, that was bringing your burdens to God. And now we know science has caught up with spirituality that movement is huge in relieving stress and relieving trauma. So those were the kinds of things that I think the Black church brought us. Now, the Black church also would have quiet periods way back in the day. That's kind of changed, but I believe the contemplative practice of meditation and prayer, all of that is healing, and all of that is in our heritage, is in our, that's the legacy that was passed down. So we are grasping that back. We have a artistic expression, that's a very fancy name for that part of our program now, where we bring artists in. They're not performers, but they are called to kind of gather the mood or the atmosphere of any particular evening and dance, sing, or play an instrument, and people are really moved by that. So again, it's kind of doing codifying things that were innate and bringing it back to say it's all right. Because what happened with those kinds of experiences, Josh, I think we kind of decided we had become educated and we're above that. We're enlightened and we can't do that now. But it turns out that that's the kind of stuff we need. We need to move our bodies. We need to moan and wail. We need to understand the physicality of pain, emotional pain, and knowing that healing comes the same way. So, all of that is what I've learned out of the Black church. The Black church is just a treasure uh, as an institution. And too often we say, "Oh, the Black church is dead," or we say religion is dead, but these are the things that have kept us strong for generations and generations.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, there's aspects of people in the white evangelical church that are starting to say, "What, we need to learn a lot from the Black church. Like there's a lot that we need to learn and to move into a new space and a different space. And we have to actually sit at the feet of the Black church and learn the things that we have
No, that's a good
not
thing.
gotten right." So
I used to take offense at that. I said, "Well, y'all got to learn from us." But you know what? It's true, because the people who have been closest to the pain usually can tell you about healing and what healing, what resiliency, what all of those things are. So we've got to do this together, Josh. You know this. We've been too much this us against them thing, and that ain't working for us. I'm telling you. So it we've got to figure out another way.
so art's body, telling your story, creating these soft spaces to be able to be vulnerable and open, to be able to receive, to listen well. These are really going to be important as we connect and heal within community, that we can go into a community in a neighborhood where we say we have to do it together. We can't have this us and them anymore. That when we do this, we can see each other for who we are, which are humans. And that's beautiful. And we need these spaces. So if you said now you're starting to codify some of these things and say these are the things that we have learned over a decade of doing these groups, and you're helping people in other cities do these groups, if people want to set up and know that there is community healing space to have these can we talk groups, what have you found helpful as it's jumped to different communities other than your own in Roxbury?
Well, that's where we are right now, and this is how grassroots we are. We're now working on curriculum so that we can pass this out. This is not a franchise. We are not trying to make a dollar out of this. We are just trying to tell people how we've done it and put that down. And so codify is exactly what we're trying to do. And that's going to take a little bit because we're mom and pop. I'm telling you, I'd like to act like, oh no, we've got this major thing, but this is so mom and pop. That's another thing. God is amazing because if you think about just, what's that? There's a text that says, do not despise small beginnings because we are definitely that. So we're trying to get to capacity or increase our capacity so that anybody who wants to do this, like AA, anybody who wants to do this is what we did, and here's how you do it. We're not quite there yet. What we're doing now is just visiting churches. We have about 18 churches now who are around the country who are that was just word of mouth who are trying to do our program and do it well. And we're trying to watch and monitor that because we want to make sure that what we're telling you, you can do easily. So we're in that kind of a phase right now. And I think by the time we get the curriculum out, by the time the book gets out, people will, yeah, but anybody who wants to do it, we are trying to go to anyone. And when it gets to the point, and I pray that it'll get to the point that people will just be doing their own interpretation of it, I think that's fine. We're checking that out now because this is for everybody. And it's not just for poor Black neighborhoods. That's the other thing. We all got stuff. And ultimately, I hope or pray that this would be something that would deal with reconciliation across cultures and all of that. But it starts with you. So that's where we are now.
So I want to know, I know that at the end of last year, you went to Palestine. And so you sat with some Palestinian Christians that have gone through a lot of trauma and grief, and they're continually like being oppressed, and it's a lot of pain. I had Munther Isaac on, who's part of Bethlehem Bible College, and I was able to talk to him about the Palestinian experience. What did you see and what did you learn from that space that your program and the things that you have done in your community, what transfers? Because trauma and pain, grief, it's a universal experience. What is transferred in that space?
Absolutely. I think that I was unprepared for the kind of trauma that we actually witnessed to a certain extent, but certainly were told. We made it over there pretty easily. There was no stops. We went all the way. We went through Canada because no American flights were going in to Jordan and then into Bethlehem, but we made it with no stops. But when we met this group of Palestinian Christians, even coming to this conference that we participated in, the women were telling us that their bus was stopped at a checkpoint. A bus was in front of theirs. A young man was dragged off the bus in front of theirs and beaten in front of them. Nobody got an explanation. Nobody knows why. And they were saying, this happens to us all the time. So the thing that I think touched me most there is that there's no post-traumatic stress. It's ongoing. And it's also anticipatory trauma and stress because you don't know what's going to happen the next day. We got a little afraid, to be honest with you, about our trip because it's such a political hot button thing. But people are hurting and need relief. Does this end the war? No. Does this make peace happen? That's beyond me. But the idea that we were willing to listen to women and women were willing to listen to each other. The second thing that touched me deeply was the fact that we were told that these people would not speak. We were invited by Churches for Middle East Peace, which is a group that you probably are aware of. And we kind of went in blind because it was just another opportunity to tell them about our program. But once we got there and were debriefed on the situation there, we were said, well, it's probably risky to even think that women will get up because they just don't in this culture because it's fear. Fear rules here, right? There's always, whatever, the boogeyman. And so, well, we said, well, if that happens, then we'll just tell our stories and sit down and, and that we'll leave it alone. There's nothing we can do. When we, got up, kind of explained the program to them, told them about our neighborhood, told them about the violence and the things that people were trying to deal with in our neighborhood. It was just like that. People got up. We then were flooded with pain. And women were telling us that they had never spoken about this, ever. Now, that threw me because you never. And then the question was, had we done something even more dangerous by kind of opening up this Pandora's box of pain? But we, afterwards, we had 2 sessions there in a 3-day conference. And afterwards, each session, we did more movement. We had prayer points that, so we hastily put things together so that women could, kind of come down from this emotional, moments that they were going through. And I think that helped, but it was a lesson for us to understand that this should not be a one-off thing. You shouldn't just go in and say, one day we're going to let you come and talk about your pain, because it doesn't work that way. So we're actually in not negotiations, but in conversations about helping these women kind of set up their own sessions. It hasn't been firmed yet. But Josh, the point is that you're right. It's the same. It's universal. This is universal pain. We don't have to say this guy's the bad guy, that guy's it's past that. We are all hurt. Everybody's hurting. Even the perpetrators in some way are hurting. So it just confirmed for me what the Bible says. We got a world in pain. We got a world that's suffering. And there are things, small things that we can do to just alleviate a little bit.
I think something that you said there is that because they're fearful, that fear rules in the United States as well. Like, it's just, everybody is afraid all the time. And I think the women said, we haven't talked about this, because they're like, when this is all over, we could probably talk about it. And I think oftentimes in all of these situations in your community in Roxbury, when this is over, let's talk about it. But we have to deal with these things and talk about these things while they're happening. And that this is the thing that then reveals the common humanity between us, so that we can maybe even get over what is ailing our community, because we could see each other for who we are now, instead of saying, I'm so afraid. Let's talk about it when it's all over. We're just going to fight against each other, and then we'll figure it out later. So it's a beautiful thing that you're doing, and it's helping communities. And I thank you for seeing the need and just stepping into it and walking with people as they share their own stories, because it's a beautiful healing process. And your book is fantastic. No One Left Alone. I love your book. It is something where I'm like, oh, this is it. I got to pass this out. This is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful process. If people would pick up No One Left Alone and read it, what do you hope your readers would get from your book?
Oh, that's such a great question. I hope that they will have a little bit better understanding about themselves and their own pain. And I hope they'll get over a little of the fear about being vulnerable. So maybe you don't start your own church program, but maybe you'll talk to your brother or your sister or your friend and listen a little bit more from your heart. Sometimes, Josh, I wake up and I think, God, you are the hokiest person. You are Pollyanna. What the heck? That then I realize this is exactly what we need to be doing. And I don't have to be ashamed of that. It's the hokey stuff that we really need to do, because somewhere along the line, we lost that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. I have a couple of quick questions at the end. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Stop drinking so much, girl. And you know what else I would do? Because my brother and I really struggle with a lot of things that, God bless him, he died of alcoholism and just had a rough way to go. At some point, I would say to myself, you are enough. Whatever you think you're not, and you think, you have to put this mask on or whatever, you're enough. And I think that that's what I've learned from this, is that I can't point to anybody, and Josh, and say, oh my God, because I got my own stuff and it's still all right. So I think that's what I tell. I always want to jump into a sermon. You ask me a question, I see myself going, so pull back, stop. We're enough. And if we only just hold on to each other.
That's beautiful. That's good. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Boy, that's a great question. What have I been? I've been on a no, haven't been doing good, but I did just get this wonderful book. I'm glad you brought that up. The name of the book is I just got it this morning. Uh, Moon Rising, Moonrise over New Jessup, and the author is Jamila Minnicks, Minnicks, and it's just a beautiful story about growing up of kind of post-slavery, Jim Crow, but it's got a lot of beauty in it. We know the struggle too, but there's a lot of beauty in that. And anything that Julia Cameron writes, I love. And yeah, those are the books I'm reading right now.
That's great. Good. How could people go out and get No One Left Alone? And then where else would you like to point people to? Is there a website to connect with what you're doing?
Absolutely. There's the canwetalknetwork.org. Tells you all about our programs and what we're trying to do as we grow. Canwetalknetwork.org. Liz Walker Books. BOOKS, because God knows I'm going to try to write another one. That's an aspirational website. I only have one. Liz Walker Books, Liz Walker Books.com. And I think those are the main things. The book is going to be, I don't know when this airs, but the book will be launched April 8th. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. And all of the proceeds, you don't make any money from books. That's another discovery I just made. But any money that we do make goes to the Can We Talk Network because we want to keep this going.
The only way to get money for the Can We Talk Network is to buy boxes of books. So go out and buy boxes of books. So if you get boxes and boxes, then make it a New York Times bestseller. Go out so there should be some money for this Can We Talk Network, because this is what is needed in this world, that we could process our pain and our grief and our suffering together in community, vulnerably, in a place where we can heal and we can see each other for who we are, that we are humans made in the image of God, that we all have pain that we have to walk through. And we serve a God that has suffered with us and has demonstrated that for us. And so if we're going to do anything to embody the ways of Jesus, one of the things we need to do is to suffer with people and walk with people in their pain, to hear their story, to listen well, to be curious about other people. And that may just heal yourself as well. So Liz, thank you. This was a fantastic conversation. I loved
it, Josh. I'm your biggest fan now. So I'll be listening to you. Thank you very much for having me. God bless you. God bless you all.